Designer Lilibet is currently one of the strongest counter picks in the current meta, but is she worth the pull? Let's take a look. Designer Lilibet is a 5-star Dark Warrior. Her S1 is Sliced to Pieces. She hits you with a chance to silence for 1 turn. Her S2 passive is Emergency Stitching. When an enemy's turn ends, she gains 10 Fighting Spirit for every debuff on her team. At 100 Fighting Spirit, she dispels every debuff on herself, gets a defense buff, then pushes her own CR by 40%. Her S3 is Model Disqualification. It decreases debuff duration on her entire team by 2 turns, then attacks all enemies, increasing their cooldown by 1 turn, then pushes the CR of all of her allies by 15%. And now that we know her kit, what are the strengths within it? It doesn't look like the S1 does much other than the silence, but it should not be underestimated because do not forget that this also provides 25 Fighting Spirit every time you use the S1, which does go into fueling her S2 passive, which is currently seen as one of the strongest passives given the current meta. It's such a reliable counter against first turn strippers and debuffers because of the self-cleanse, the CR push, and the defense buff given to herself when her Fighting Spirit hits 100. This makes her a very hard hero to lock down, especially when combined with the S3 Model Disqualification. This helps remove nearly all debuffs from her entire team, pushes their CR, and resets the enemy team, while also providing some very impressive damage. This makes her the ideal candidate for countering disgusting heroes like Celia's, Para, and AOL, as well as any other hero that has debuffs. And as a defense scaling hero, this naturally allows her to be built as a bruiser, because the tankier you are, the more damage you deal. With the addition of the defense buff given to her from the S2 passive, this makes her even stronger. But remember, the defense buff isn't all the S2 passive has to offer. She also pushes her own CR when attaining full Fighting Spirit, allowing her to rotate her turns very quickly, which also means that she can inflict silence and reset the enemy's skills more often, giving her a surprising amount of crowd control. And now that we know her strengths, what are her weaknesses? One of her biggest weaknesses is that the S3 is not a real cleanse, but instead only reduces the debuff duration, which means that it will not do anything against the bomb debuff. Luckily, her S2 cleanse does remove the bomb, but if her Fighting Spirit fills too early and she cleanses while not taking the next turn, this opens her up to taking on some debuffs since she is typically going to have 0 FRES. So even though you don't want to take debuffs, you also need them for her S2 to proc, which means that her passive is very reliant on her enemy's attacks. This does steer her into being more of a counter pick and a niche hero, but luckily she is a very strong one. Now, the common weakness shared among all defense scaling heroes is that defense breaks are incredibly deadly, because not only does it make her much less tanky, it severely reduces the damage output. And another downside of having most of her tankiness come in the form of defense is that defense ignoring heroes will hurt really bad. But what also hurts really bad is her PvE performance. I cannot see her being useful in any PvE content, but as always, they might find a very niche spot in a certain situation, but as a whole, I would not consider her to be a PvE hero at all. Much like most other ML5s, she is built solely for PvP. She can find a place to shine in all PvP content. Because of how dominant Para, Celia's, Ran, and AOL are, she is going to be a very solid hero everywhere. She can be used on defense to deter these heroes, but can also be used in offense to counter these heroes. But to be able to do that successfully, you are going to have to know how to gear her properly. The first build I have for you here is a basic speed build. I don't think there is a need for an immunity set, so I do recommend a crit set. You may also put her on a revenge set instead of speed. Because of her lower HP and higher defense, she will be able to make great use of that gear set. Although she's got amazing utility, remember that she is still a DPS at heart, so your focus is going to be in the stats that will let her hit like a truck: crit damage, crit chance, and defense. And now, even though her S2 passive does give her some impressive CR pushes, I still recommend a lot of speed so that you can keep rotating her turns as fast as possible. You may also throw some effectiveness in there, but it's not super important. For artifacts, I do recommend Sigurd's Scythe or Draco Plate. Both of these artifacts do add survivability and damage. Symbol of Unity is a given since it is an all-around solid choice for any DPS hero. Same with Azure Comet, since it does relieve the crit chance requirement and provide some CR pushes. Creation and Destruction is a gamble, but it could be huge if it does proc. And finally, Durandal, because CR pushes never hurt anyone, especially when she's tanky enough to take some hits. And now this second build is the counter build. I've always used and preferred this one over the prior one. The stats you're shooting for are pretty much the same. Of course, the speed is going to be a bit lower because of the gear set, but that does not necessarily mean that she will take less turns. When she counters with the S1, she gains 25 fighting spirit, which could fill her fighting spirit, boosting her with 40% CR. And that being said, I would highly recommend Sigurd's Scythe over every other artifact. I do believe that it is the best artifact for any warrior that is built on a counter set. But if you don't want to roll with that, the list is going to be the same as the previous one, with the addition of Cradle of Life. With this, you can land some additional debuffs when countering. And now, here are my final thoughts on Dilibet. We are not even gonna pay attention to her PvE performance because it really doesn't matter. What we are concerned about though is her PvP performance. Her arena score is obviously going to be very high given that she is the one who single-handedly ended the Cerise F10A arena meta. And now she's proving to be as useful as ever, countering the Celilius, AOL, and Para trash. In Guild Wars, she's not really as useful as she is in Arena, but she can still definitely find her place and prove to be useful when taken into the correct situations. Then there is no debating her resurgence in World Arena. She's pretty much an auto lock-in when you see a single debuffer on the opposing team, as her last buff no longer requires a huge onslaught of debuffs before being able to pop off. A single debuffer on the enemy team is enough to open the doors for her. But if you want to use her, does she require the best? I would recommend a minimum of 17 molas on her, of course maxing her S2 passive, and as always, since she is a DPS hero, she is going to greatly benefit from getting max molad. The gear quality needed on her I feel is very high, even though she's not as stat heavy as other bruisers like Fire Ravi, who requires the attack stat. She needs her stats to be very high though to be able to output some good damage. She will work with mediocre stats, but at that point she's only filling the utility role rather than both DPS and utility. And believe me, it'll be worth it. I really do think that she is worth the investment because I can't see her going away anytime soon. Depending on the meta, she could take a backseat for a while, but anytime you see a debuffer, she's going to be the first hero that comes to your mind, and she's gonna be proving herself to be very useful. If she is not meta, she will be a solid pocket pick when given the chance, much like RB or SSB. So it's no doubt that she's a great hero, but is she a great waifu? I've expressed countless times how much I love her design. It is definitely one of my favorites in this entire game. I think her outfit completely matches her personality, and I love her choice of weapons. Then well, she's also got the Fang. This all wraps her up in a super cute package that you would just need to protect. You gotta keep that smile and that spunky attitude. However, in the end, will it waifu? Not sure if I can answer that, so we'll move on to the most important thing. Is Designer Lilibet worth the pull? Yes, I think she is totally worth the pull. She was quite questionable before her buff, but after her latest buff, she is very strong and much more usable. I don't think she's overpowered like some other ML heroes, but that's perfectly fine. I find her to be very fun to play with, and because of her kit, I don't think there's any room for regret. So if you want more guides, check out that playlist right over there. But I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe. Thank you for hanging out with us, and I'll see you guys next time, man. Bye.